There was even discussion about how passengers would psychologically experience the journey itself. Nazi planners believed the Breitspurbahn should feel less like public transportation and more like entering a moving symbol of German supremacy. The trains were intentionally designed to overwhelm passengers through sheer scale. Corridors were wider than many hotel hallways of the era. Ceilings towered overhead. Observation lounges used enormous glass panels to create panoramic views unlike anything seen on conventional railways. Some proposed first-class suites were designed almost like private apartments. They included bedrooms, lounges, personal washrooms, wardrobes, and servant areas for high-ranking officials or wealthy travelers. Certain concepts featured massive curved windows stretching from floor to ceiling, so passengers could watch entire landscapes roll past while sitting in luxury armchairs beneath decorative lighting. The sleeping cars were equally extravagant. Unlike cramped compartments on ordinary European trains, Breitspurbahn sleeping wagons were envisioned as spacious hotel-like rooms with thick carpets, polished furniture, heavy curtains, and private seating areas. Designers studied luxury ocean liners and grand hotels for inspiration because Hitler admired the prestige associated with transatlantic ships. The Breitspurbahn was meant to transfer the feeling of an ocean voyage onto land. Some train concepts even included promenades similar to ship decks where passengers could walk, socialize, and enjoy fresh air during long-distance journeys across Europe and Asia. Dining cars resembled floating banquet halls, complete with elaborate table settings, decorative woodwork, giant windows, and carefully arranged lighting to create an atmosphere of imperial elegance. Engineers also explored entertainment systems far ahead of their time. Certain proposals included onboard radio broadcasting rooms, public announcement systems throughout train, and centralized climate control systems capable of heating or ventilating enormous passenger compartments. Special conference rooms were considered for political meetings and state functions during travel. The Nazis imagined government officials effectively ruling parts of the empire while moving across it. But as luxurious as the passenger trains appeared, the military concepts were even more extreme. Several Breitspurbahn freight locomotives were planned with astonishing hauling capacity. Some designs aimed to pull thousands of tons of cargo in a single journey. Giant military supply trains would transport tanks, artillery, ammunition, fuel, industrial machinery, and construction equipment across occupied territories without relying on vulnerable sea routes. One proposal envisioned specialized armored transport wagons capable of carrying entire mechanized units directly to the front lines. Other designs included mobile repair workshops, communication centers, and anti-aircraft defense platforms mounted directly onto the trains themselves. In essence, some Breitspurbahn concepts resembled moving military fortresses. This idea reflected Germany's growing logistical problems during the war. As Allied bombing intensified and naval blockades restricted maritime supply lines, Nazi planners became obsessed with creating gigantic land-based transportation systems immune to traditional naval warfare. Hitler believed a continental rail empire would make Germany economically invulnerable. He repeatedly spoke about linking Europe with Asia through rail corridors stretching thousands of kilometers. Some maps envisioned routes extending deep into occupied Soviet territories through the Caucasus oil regions and eventually towards Central Asia. Others imagined connections through the Balkans into the Middle East. Nazi planners viewed the Breitspurbahn as the infrastructure backbone of a future Eurasian empire dominated entirely from Berlin. The scale of construction required was almost incomprehensible. Entire forests would need to be cleared for expanded railway corridors. Mountains would require massive tunneling operations. Thousands of bridges and viaducts had to be constructed at dimensions far beyond normal railway engineering standards. The comparison was deliberate. Some proposed stations were larger than small towns. The Berlin terminal alone was imagined as an enormous architectural complex connected to Hitler's planned transformation of Berlin into Germania, the gigantic world capital envisioned by Nazi architect Albert Speer. Gigantic dome, colossal boulevards, and oversized monuments were all intended to project the image of a civilization destined to rule forever. The Breitspurbahn fit perfectly into that vision. Everything about it was oversized because Nazi ideology associated size with power. The regime constantly pursued projects that ignored practical limitations in favor of spectacle. Tanks became larger. Buildings became tall. smaller. Stadiums became bigger. Even artillery evolved into monstrous weapons like the Schwerer Gustav railway gun, a massive cannon so enormous it required special rail tracks simply to operate. The Breitspurbahn belonged to the same mentality. Bigger meant more intimidating. More intimidating meant more powerful. And power itself became the ultimate obsession. Yet the project revealed another contradiction inside the Nazi system. Germany already possessed one of the most advanced railway networks in Europe. The existing standard gauge railways were efficient, heavily developed, and capable of handling enormous military logistics. Many railway experts quietly understood that replacing or competing with that system using gigantic broad gauge tracks would create endless inefficiencies. Freight would constantly need transferring between incompatible rail systems. Factories would require entirely new production standards. Maintenance equipment would become specialized and expensive. International integration with existing railways would collapse. The broader gauge solved very few real problems while creating countless new ones. But in Hitler's inner circle, technical criticism mattered less than ideological symbolism. Officials often supported impossible projects because opposing Hitler could destroy careers, or worse. Over time, Nazi leadership increasingly rewarded loyalty and grand ambition over realism. The Breitspurbahn survived partly because nobody wanted to openly tell Hitler that his dream railway made little practical sense, and so the fantasy continued growing larger. By the later stages of the war, some concepts imagined trains moving at extraordinary speeds, despite their gigantic size. Others proposed colossal electric locomotives with futuristic aerodynamic designs unlike anything operating in the 1940s. Artists produced dramatic paintings showing sleek super trains racing beneath gigantic monuments and endless Nazi banners. The railway became propaganda for a future that never arrived. Meanwhile, reality outside those drawings was catastrophic. German soldiers froze to death on the Eastern Front. Entire cities were reduced to rubble by Allied bombing campaigns. Fuel reserves collapsed. Industries suffered massive shortages. Civilians faced rationing, destruction, and exhaustion. Yet even as the Third Reich approached total collapse, planning for the Breitspurbahn never completely disappeared. That may be the most revealing part of the entire story. The project survived because it was never truly about transportation. It was about fantasy. A fantasy of limitless expansion, a fantasy of technological supremacy, a fantasy of eternal empire. The Breitspurbahn represented a regime trying to build monuments large enough to make itself appear invincible, even while the foundations beneath it were already crumbling. And today, the surviving sketches feel haunting, precisely because they capture that contradiction so clearly. Immense luxury beside unimaginable brutality, engineering ambition mixed with ideological madness, futuristic designs created in the middle of one of history's deadliest wars. A gigantic railway system planned for a 1,000-year empire that collapsed after only 12 years.